People think crying easily means you are weak, but what if your tears are not proof that you are falling apart? What if they are proof that your nervous system is noticing something everyone else was trained to ignore? Why people who cry easily are often misunderstood. I have always found it strange how quickly we judge tears. A person can be angry, sarcastic, cold, distant, even cruel, and people may still call them strong. But the moment someone's eyes fill with tears, the room changes. People look away. Someone gets uncomfortable. Someone says, "Don't cry." And somehow, the person who is feeling something honestly becomes the problem. This is one of those questions I keep coming back to, because it feels simple on the surface, but the deeper you look, the stranger it becomes. Why did we learn to treat crying like evidence of failure? Most of us did not invent that belief. We inherited it. Maybe it started when we were children. You fell down and someone said, "You're okay." You were hurt and someone said, "Be strong." You felt overwhelmed and someone said, "Stop crying." Maybe no one meant to shame you. Maybe they were only repeating what they had been taught. But the message still entered the body. Tears are inconvenient. Visible emotion is embarrassing. Sensitivity is something you need to control before people start judging you. And if you were one of the people who could not stop the tears from coming, you probably learned something even heavier. You learned that your natural emotional response made other people uncomfortable. So you started apologizing for it, hiding it, swallowing it, laughing it off, trying to become the kind of person who could feel less. But here is the question that changes everything. What if the first mistake was assuming tears means someone is falling apart? What if the real tragedy is that so many people had to disconnect from their own emotional life just to be accepted? Because tears may only be the surface signal of a much larger inner process. A body responding before language can explain why. So before we call someone fragile, maybe we should ask what their tears are actually carrying. And once we stop treating tears as the whole story, the next question becomes, why do certain people seem to feel the world with more intensity in the first place? This is where emotional sensitivity becomes more interesting than most people realize. Because sensitivity is often treated like a personality problem. A person may feel hurt more easily, notice tension faster, or react strongly to a song, a memory, a tone of voice, or a small act of kindness. But the more I've looked into human behavior and highly sensitive people, the less satisfying those explanations become. Those labels name the reaction, but they rarely explain the processing behind it. Some nervous systems appear to process emotional and sensory information more deeply, not superior, not broken, simply more responsive to certain kinds of input. A highly sensitive person may enter a room and immediately notice things other people overlook, the slight change in someone's expression, the heaviness behind a casual answer, the silence between two people who are pretending nothing is wrong, the way someone smiles with their mouth, but not with their eyes. To most people, these details pass by as background noise. To a sensitive person, they may arrive as information. And sometimes, that information carries weight. This is why tears can appear in moments that seem small from the outside. A friend says, "I'm fine," but something in their voice sounds tired. A stranger shows unexpected gentleness, and for some reason, it feels almost overwhelming. A movie scene touches a memory that was never fully put away. A piece of music says something the person has not been able to say out loud. From the outside, someone may ask, "Why are you crying? Nothing happened." But maybe they are responding to layers the room never learned how to name. But I am not sure. Nothing happened. Something very real may have happened inside the person who noticed it. Their system may have connected a subtle signal to a deeper meaning, and their body responded before words could catch up. That is the part people often miss. Crying easily is not always a reaction to the size of the event. Sometimes it is a reaction to the depth of the processing, and when we understand sensitivity this way, it becomes harder to dismiss it as weakness. Because maybe the sensitive person is not overwhelmed by nothing. Maybe they are responding to emotional details most people never slowed down enough to see. And once you start noticing those hidden layers, another question appears. What happens when the emotion a sensitive person is carrying is not even their own? I think this is where people who cry easily are most often misunderstood. Sometimes the pain did not begin inside them. It entered through someone else's face, someone else's voice, someone else's silence. A friend starts telling a painful story, and before the story reaches its hardest part, their throat tightens. Someone across the table is trying very hard not to cry, and somehow their own eyes begin to fill. A stranger on the news loses someone they love, and even though that person is far away, the sadness lands close. A scene in a film shows someone being quietly left behind, and suddenly, it does not feel like acting anymore. It feels human. This is one of the strangest and most beautiful things about empathy. We do not only understand other people from a distance. Sometimes we feel an echo of them inside our own bodies. A trembling voice can create tension in our chest. A grieving face can make our stomach sink. A moment of tenderness can soften something in us before we even know why. Psychology often talks about this through ideas like empathy, emotional contagion, or empathic resonance. But I think anyone who has cried for someone else understands it before they ever hear the terminology. There are people whose nervous systems seem to respond to another person's inner world almost immediately, not because they are trying to perform compassion, not because they want attention or are trying to make the moment about themselves, but because another person's emotion does not stay entirely outside of them. It crosses over, it becomes physical, and for highly sensitive people, that boundary can feel thinner than it does for others. This is why they may cry not only at pain, but also at kindness, at relief, at reconciliation, at someone finally being seen after years of being ignored, at an ordinary moment that suddenly reveals how much love was hiding inside it. Their tears are not always sadness. Sometimes they are the body's response to meaning. And this kind of emotional openness can be deeply moving, but it can also be exhausting. Because when you feel other people this strongly, a normal day can carry invisible weight. A conversation is not just words. It is tone, timing, hesitation, facial expression, emotional history. A room is not just a place. It is a field of signals. Who feels left out? Who is pretending to be okay? Who is asking for comfort without saying it? Who is carrying something quietly? And after absorbing all of that, the sensitive person may leave feeling drained, even if nothing dramatic happened. That is the part many people never see. They see the tears. They do not see the emotional tracking that came before them. They see the reaction. They do not see the resonance. So maybe people who cry easily are not simply too emotional. They may be emotionally permeable, tuned to frequencies many people have learned to mute. Their tears may not mean they cannot handle life. They may mean life still reaches them deeply. But when life reaches someone that deeply, it often does not leave as quickly as it arrived. That may be one of the hardest parts of being emotionally sensitive. The moment ends, but the feeling does not. The conversation is over, but the mind keeps replaying it. The room is quiet now, but the body is still carrying what happened there. I've always been struck by how differently people recover from the same emotional moment. One person can have an uncomfortable exchange, shake it off, and move on with the day. Another person walks away and keeps hearing the sentence again. Not just the words, the pause before the words, the expression on the other person's face, the possibility that something was misunderstood, the feeling that maybe they said too much, or not enough, or revealed something they should have hidden. This is where emotional sensitivity can begin to look like overthinking. But from the inside, it often does not feel like choosing to overthink. It feels more like the mind is trying to finish something, trying to understand what happened, trying to organize the emotional residue, trying to give shape to a moment everyone else already left behind. Psychology might call this rumination, but that word can sound cold compared to what it feels like in the body. Because for a sensitive person, memory is not always just information. Memory can carry atmosphere. A tone of voice can return with the same heaviness. A look can come back with the same sting. An old embarrassment can still heat the face years later. A tender goodbye can still bring tears before the person even knows why. And maybe this is why crying becomes so important, because thought can only process so much. You can analyze the conversation, search for the lesson, and explain to yourself why it mattered. But eventually, the body may need its own language. Tears may be that language, not always a collapse, not always a crisis. Sometimes they are the nervous system releasing pressure it has been carrying in silence, like steam leaving a system that has been sealed too tightly for too long. After a real cry, many people describe something subtle but undeniable. The problem is still there. The memory may still matter, but the body feels less clenched. The breath comes back. The emotion stops pressing so hard against the inside of the chest. That makes me wonder if we have misunderstood tears not only socially, but biologically. Crying may not be proof that someone has lost control. It may be one way the system tries to return to balance. People who cry easily may not be failing to handle emotion. Their emotions may simply travel farther, stay longer, and ask to be released more honestly. And if tears can help the body return to balance, then the final question is not why some people cry so much, but why we learn to admire the people who never seem moved at all. We often mistake composure for strength. Society often calls someone strong when they stay composed, reveal nothing, and keep the same face through pain, beauty, grief, and tenderness. And sometimes, that is strength. But sometimes, I wonder if it is also distance. Because not crying does not always mean someone is stronger. Maybe they learn to hide faster. Maybe emotion once felt unsafe. Maybe disconnection became a survival skill. That is why I think people who cry easily deserve a different kind of understanding. Many of them are not weak in the way the world assumes. They are often the ones who notice when someone is quietly hurting, the ones who remember the detail you thought no one cared about, the ones who can sit beside pain without rushing to cover it with advice. That kind of sensitivity can be heavy, but it is also deeply human. A person who cries easily may not have failed to grow stronger. They may simply have refused or never learned to become numb. They still feel grief when something is lost. They still feel tenderness when kindness appears. They still feel moved by beauty, memory, relief, and connection. They still let life touch them. And in a world that often rewards emotional armor, that openness can look fragile from the outside. But maybe it is not fragility. Maybe it is courage in a quieter form. So before we call someone too emotional, maybe we should ask what their tears are revealing. Their tears may not show a person falling apart. They may reveal someone still connected to the full weight and beauty of being human. And maybe feeling deeply was never the opposite of strength. Maybe it was one of its most misunderstood forms. The deeper lesson, at least to me, is this. Tears are not always the opposite of strength. Sometimes they are the evidence that something inside us is still awake, still listening, still responding, still willing to be touched by the emotional truth of a moment. That may be why tears deserve more curiosity than judgment, because we live in a world that teaches people to look composed before it teaches them to understand what they feel. So perhaps the point is not to romanticize crying. Not every tear is wisdom. Not every emotional reaction is automatically right. But every tear is information. It tells us that something mattered, something landed, something inside the nervous system reached a point where silence was no longer enough. And in daily life, maybe the way to apply this is simple. The next time you cry, or see someone else cry, pause before judging it. Instead of asking, "Why am I like this?" try asking, "What is this feeling trying to show me?" Instead of seeing tears as an interruption, see them as a doorway into sensitivity, memory, empathy, overload, grief, love, or a truth the mind has not yet found words for. And maybe, if we learn to meet tears with curiosity instead of shame, we become a little more human with ourselves and a little more gentle with each other. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Do you think crying easily is weakness or a misunderstood kind of strength?